The U.S. Senate hearing chamber buzzed with tension. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and aides shuffled stacks of papers, trying to maintain calm in a storm of political heat. It was just another Wednesday in Donald Trump's second term, but things were far from ordinary. At the center of it all sat Karoline Leavitt, the poised, razor-sharp White House press secretary. Known for her fiery press briefings, youthful charisma, and staunch conservatism, Karoline had quickly become a symbol of Trump's unapologetic America First resurgence. Love her or loathe her, she was impossible to ignore. On this day, however, she was not at the podium or in front of a press gaggle. She had been summoned to testify before a Senate Committee on Media Ethics and Government Communications. What was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing had quickly turned into a political battleground. And leading the charge was Senator Elizabeth Warren, the seasoned Democrat from Massachusetts. Dressed in her signature bright-colored blazer, Warren leaned forward, adjusting her glasses as she eyed Karoline like a hawk. Her voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "Ms. Leavitt," she said, stressing the Ms. with clear disdain. "You stand at the podium of the White House every day, speaking on behalf of the President of the United States. You wield influence over public perception, shape the daily narrative, and frame critical issues facing millions of Americans." Karoline nodded respectfully, already anticipating where Warren was headed. Warren continued, "But tell me, what qualifications do you actually have to hold such a position? You graduated from a small college in New Hampshire, correct? St. Anselm, I believe? Not Harvard, not Yale, not even Georgetown." There were scattered chuckles from some Democratic staffers behind her. Karoline's expression didn't flinch. Warren leaned closer. "You didn't study law. You didn't study political science. You majored in communications, didn't you?" Another ripple of mockery swept across the hearing room. "I suppose," Warren added with a smirk. "The bar has been lowered so much in this administration that all it takes to shape national policy is a Wi-Fi connection and a Twitter account." A thunderous silence filled the chamber. The cameras zoomed in. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for. Karoline glanced toward the GOP senators, Senator Josh Hawley, Senator J.D. Vance, even Senator Tim Scott. All looked ready to jump to her defense, but she held up one hand, calmly. She turned back to Elizabeth Warren, locked eyes with her, and said in a voice strong enough to silence the smirking aides and stun the Twitterati, "With all due respect, Senator Warren." Warren raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect. That's a phrase often used before disrespecting someone." Karoline smiled. "No, ma'am. That's a phrase used when a young woman is about to teach you something you weren't expecting." The room held its breath. Karoline Leavitt sat upright, her hands clasped on the table in front of her, her expression unshaken by the public belittling of her academic background. She leaned slightly toward the microphone and locked eyes with Senator Warren. "Senator," she began, her voice measured and steady, "you said I didn't go to Harvard or Yale or Georgetown. You're right. I went to St. Anselm College, a small liberal arts school in New Hampshire. I majored in communications, not law or political science." Warren folded her arms, waiting for what she assumed would be an embarrassed walkback. But instead, Karoline smiled. "I come from a blue-collar family. My father is a small business owner. My mother raised 3 kids while working part-time jobs. I didn't grow up surrounded by think tanks or policy elites. I grew up around people who work double shifts, pay taxes, and don't have the luxury of snubbing someone's worth based on their zip code or their alma mater." Senator J.D. Vance subtly nodded in appreciation. Karoline went on. "The people who elected President Trump and support this administration aren't sitting in Ivy League lecture halls. They're the ones who stock our grocery shelves, build our homes, defend our borders, and teach our children in public schools. They don't want snobbery. They want solutions." There was a noticeable shift in the room. "And as for communications," she continued, "in case anyone has forgotten, we're living in a world where information spreads in seconds, where wars are won or lost based on narratives, where the truth is often drowned in spin. Communications isn't a Fallback major. It's the front line of modern democracy. And I was hired not because of a pedigree, but because I can speak truth clearly, concisely, and directly to the American people. Warren tried to interject, but Karoline raised a hand, not to silence the senator, but to reclaim her time with assertive grace. I'll take this opportunity, Senator, to remind you that intelligence, competence, and leadership don't come with a Harvard stamp of approval. Abraham Lincoln didn't go to college. Ronald Reagan graduated from Eureka College. And Donald J. Trump, for whom I proudly serve, built an empire not with a degree in political science, but with guts, vision, and a direct line to the American people. The camera cut to Senator Ted Cruz, who sat back with an impressed smirk. But let me be absolutely clear, Karoline said, her tone sharpening, this administration doesn't define people by where they went to school. We define them by what they do for the country. She took a breath, then delivered the final blow with elegance and confidence. So if you think mocking my education makes you look superior, Senator Warren, it doesn't. It reminds Americans why they stopped listening to elites who think they know better than the rest of us. The room erupted not in chaos but in an intense silence. Warren, caught off guard, blinked rapidly and leaned back. Even the mainstream media reporters who had gathered hoping for a viral moment of Karoline crumbling under pressure now typed furiously into their laptops. But the headlines were changing. Karoline Leavitt claps back at Warren with patriotic fire. White House press secretary shuts down Ivy League arrogance. Karoline's moment from underdog to unstoppable. As the hearing went on, it was clear the tone had shifted. What began as an ambush had turned into an awakening. Karoline wasn't just defending herself, she was speaking for millions. By the time Karoline stepped out of the Senate hearing room, she was already trending on X, formerly Twitter. Hashtags like hashtag Karoline Clapback, hashtag Elite Smackdown, and hashtag I Stand With Karoline surged through conservative and moderate feeds alike. Outside, reporters gathered like a hungry pack, thrusting microphones in her direction. Karoline, was Senator Warren out of line? Do you think your remarks will increase political tensions between the White House and Senate Democrats? Do you believe your educational background gives you a unique connection with average Americans? Karoline paused at the top of the Capitol steps. Her press aide whispered something about staying on message, but she waved it off. She turned to the cameras. I don't care about elitist attacks on where I went to college, she said. What I care about is bringing clarity and truth to the American people. Senator Warren's mockery wasn't about me. It was about every young woman who didn't go to a top-tier university but still dares to dream big. I won't apologize for being one of them. And with that, she walked away, the Capitol dome shining behind her, the press flurry now a full-blown media firestorm. That evening, the clip of Karoline's exchange aired on every major network. Even usually liberal outlets like MSNBC couldn't help but comment on her composure and conviction. On Fox News, Tucker Carlson opened his segment with the hearing. We saw today what happens when elitist arrogance collides with real-world grit. Elizabeth Warren mocked Karoline Leavitt's education like she was swatting a fly. But instead, she unleashed a storm. Karoline isn't just the press secretary, she's the voice of the American middle class. On CNN, Anderson Cooper took a more measured tone. Karoline Leavitt's response to Senator Warren raises questions about how we value education in our politics. Is institutional prestige more important than public service? And how does that play with a voter base that increasingly rejects coastal elitism? By the next morning, interviews were pouring in from across the country. Local radio shows in Ohio, Iowa, and Florida invited Karoline to speak. Parents, working-class students, and former service members called in to support her. One truck driver from Pennsylvania said, I didn't go to college either, but I serve this country every day on the road. Karoline spoke for me. A single mom from Oklahoma posted on Facebook. My daughter goes to community college and wants to be in politics. Karoline Leavitt just showed her she belongs. Inside the White House, President Trump was watching everything unfold. Seated in the Oval Office with Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, he slapped the desk and beamed. She's got fight, Trump said. That's what we need. That's what America needs. He picked up the phone and told an aide, get Karoline in here tomorrow morning. I've got a few things to say to her publicly. By the end of the week, Karoline wasn't just the White House press secretary. She was a rising star. Not manufactured by the media, not sculpted by think tanks, built by fire, pressure, and poise under attack. Even some Democrats quietly admitted Warren may have overplayed her hand. The blowback was real. Letters to the editor in Massachusetts newspapers questioned Warren's tone. Liberal columnists tried to reframe the moment, but the optics were bad. An older, Harvard-educated senator condescending to a young, articulate woman from a working-class background. The country wasn't buying the spin. Karoline Leavitt had gone from being a political staffer to a national symbol of defiance against elitism. She had turned a Senate ambush into an American comeback story, and she was just getting started. The next morning, Karoline arrived at the West Wing sharp at 7:30 a.m., the Capitol hearing still buzzing through national headlines. Secret Service escorted her up as usual, but this time the agents gave a knowing nod. One even smiled and said, "Nice work yesterday, ma'am." When she entered the Oval Office, President Donald J. Trump stood behind the resolute desk. His classic red tie slightly loosened and a pile of newspapers splayed in front of him. He looked up and grinned. "Well, well," he said, waving toward the leather chairs. "America's newest star." Karoline smiled but kept her composure. "Good morning, Mr. President." Trump gestured for her to sit. "I watched the whole thing. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You didn't just respond, you represented. You stood for the working class, for the outsiders. And you did it with class and fire. I want you front and center next week." "Front and center, sir?" "We're planning a town hall in Michigan," Trump explained. "Blue-collar country. Those folks are going to love you. I want you speaking before I come on stage." Karoline blinked, honored but surprised. "Sir, I'm just your press secretary." Trump leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Not anymore. You're the people's press secretary." She exhaled, understanding the gravity of what was happening. This was more than a job, it was a movement. That week, Karoline flew to Grand Rapids, Michigan, alongside Trump's campaign team. The town hall was being held in an old factory space converted into an event center. Over 3,000 people packed the room, with overflow lines snaking around the block. As Karoline took the stage, chants of USA, USA echoed across the crowd. She didn't use a teleprompter. She didn't need one. "Good evening, Michigan," she began. "My name is Karoline Leavitt. I was born and raised in New Hampshire. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't inherit a political dynasty. But like you, I was raised to work hard, speak the truth, and never back down from a bully." The crowd roared. "You might have seen a clip this week where I was told I wasn't smart enough because I didn't go to Harvard. Well, let me tell you something, there's more wisdom in your average American diner than in a DC faculty lounge. And I'm not here to impress the elites, I'm here to serve the people." Applause shook the stage. "President Trump hired me not because of where I came from, but because of where we're going, and folks, we are going to take this country back from the ivory towers and hand it back to the factories, the farms, and the families who built it." The moment was electric. Media networks scrambled to adjust their headlines in real time. Conservative voices across platforms called it a new era of populist conservatism. Even moderate independents were taking notice. In the days that followed, Trump posted a video of her speech to Truth Social. "Karoline Leavitt is a force for the American people. She speaks truth. She loves this country. She makes me proud every single day." The radical left tried to embarrass her, and she embarrassed them instead. That post received over 4.1 million views within 12 hours. Back in Washington, Senator Warren was noticeably quiet. Her team released a muted statement about encouraging more respectful political discourse, but the damage was done. Even progressive podcasts began questioning if the senator's attack had unintentionally elevated her opponent's voice. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Elizabeth Warren, a lifelong champion of women's empowerment, had mocked a young woman on national television and handed her the biggest platform of her life. Karoline, meanwhile, returned to the press room at the White House. When she stepped behind the podium the following Monday, reporters stood not because protocol demanded it, but out of newfound respect. She looked around, smiled, and said, "Miss me." Laughter erupted in the briefing room. She proceeded to take questions on foreign policy, economic outlooks, and midterm election forecasts with the same poise she had in that Senate hearing room. But now there was something different. She wasn't just defending the administration anymore. She was defining it. The following month was a whirlwind for Karoline Leavitt. Appearances in battleground states, national interviews, a cover story on the Federalist. Even Time magazine couldn't resist a cover line. The press secretary who fought back. Inside the Beltway, the talk wasn't about who was the loudest on social media or the most viral online, it was about who had authenticity. Karoline, to the surprise of the establishment, had become the face of the next generation of conservative leadership. And then came the unexpected moment that solidified everything. It was a quiet Friday afternoon, unusually calm for the White House briefing room. Karoline was walking back to her office after a meeting on Veterans Affairs when a call came in from the West Wing switchboard. "Karoline," said the operator, "you have a personal visitor, says she's here without an appointment but insists she needs just 5 minutes of your time." Karoline sighed. "Who is it?" "She says her name is Lynn Walsh. From Massachusetts." Karoline paused. She didn't recognize the name, but something about it struck a chord. "Send her to my office." Lynn Walsh was in her late 60s, wearing a faded Red Sox hoodie and carrying a large manila envelope. "I'm sorry to barge in," she said, nervously wringing her hands. "I'm not a donor, not a lobbyist. I'm just a mom. I had to see you. I watched that Senate hearing when Warren mocked you." Karoline smiled gently. "It's all right, ma'am. Thank you for coming." "No," Lynn said, eyes beginning to water. "You don't understand. My daughter went to a community college in Worcester. She's brilliant. Hardworking. She wanted to work in politics too. But she was told by professors and even recruiters in D.C. that she'd never make it because she didn't go to the right schools. It broke her spirit." Karoline sat down beside her. "But that day," Lynn continued, her voice cracking, "when you stood up there and told Senator Warren off? When you said your degree didn't define your worth. My daughter cried. And then she pulled out her resume again. She's applying for internships now. She believes in herself again." Karoline's eyes welled up. "What's her name?" "Marissa. She's 22. Karoline walked over to her desk, pulled out a card, and scribbled a number. "Have her call this number. It goes to the Deputy Chief of Staff. Tell her Karoline Leavitt personally referred her for the White House internship program." Lynn blinked, stunned. "Are you serious?" "I'm dead serious," Karoline replied. "Tell her the door is open, and I'll be waiting to shake her hand when she gets here." Later that night, Karoline sat on the Truman balcony overlooking the South Lawn, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. The lights of D.C. glowed in the distance. For the first time in a while, the noise had quieted. She thought of her own parents. Her upbringing in a modest New Hampshire home. The guidance counselors who told her not to aim too high. The professors who didn't think she'd ever step foot in the White House. And she thought about that Senate hearing. How it could have broken her. Instead, it launched her. She stood, walked back inside, and saw a new memo waiting on her desk. It was a draft outline for the president's next national address, and at the top, under key voices to introduce POTUS, her name was bolded. Karoline Leavitt, the American underdog. And suddenly, it all came full circle. She hadn't just survived the mockery. She'd conquered it. Within months, Karoline had become more than a press secretary, she was a national symbol. A book deal followed. A podcast was launched. College students from across the country, including from trade schools and community colleges, wrote to her daily. "Thank you for proving we belong. I didn't think someone like me had a shot. Now I know better." By the time the next presidential election cycle rolled around, whispers had begun in political circles. "She's the future," they said. And somewhere, perhaps still seething from her failed ambush, Senator Elizabeth Warren watched as the young woman she once mocked had transformed into the voice of a generation. Because Karoline Leavitt wasn't just smart. She was unstoppable.